Thanks so much for joining us here on the Daily Racing Form YouTube. I'm Gino Buccola alongside David Aragona. We're going to head on out to Gulfstream Park for a really interesting race on Thursday, David. And remember, everyone, since it's the race of the day, you get free past performances. Let's head on out and take a look at the field for race number 8 on Thursday. So this race really kind of runs through Chad Brown and the two runners that he has coming off of long layoffs. He has the one, Tuscan Gold, who we actually saw run fourth in the Preakness, a very good third in the Louisiana Derby, but has not raced since. Trouble with the airway, so they had the tongue tie procedure. Then the number Malarchuk is another one who had physical issues, and we have not seen race since April. So those are the two that will take a lot of money, and they're very different as far as tactics are concerned, David. Tuscan Gold is not very quick early, and Malarchuk on the opposite end of the spectrum is very fast early on.
Yeah, this is a really intriguing first level allowance. There is quality in this race to be sure, but all of the horses have flaws coming in here, whether it be the pace situation, the distance, coming off layoffs or trips. There's definitely a lot to discuss, and it's hard to feel very confident about anybody finding this to be the ideal spot.
Let's see what Timeform US thinks about the pace projector in here. I'd imagine the 6 Malarchuk forwardly placed, but they've got Who's the King and God's Timing up close with that one, pushing the pace a little bit. I think for Who's the King, he seemed like he just doesn't really want to be coming from off the pace all too much. He's been a kind of a quirky horse and one that's tough to ride. You can even see in the comment lines like he gets himself into some trouble. Sometimes Irad will be aboard today. God's Timing probably in the mix there too. So, I mean, I'd expect them to get really aggressive with the 6 and try to put him on the front end.
Yeah, you would think that Malarchuk, given the fact that he won in gate to wire fashion when he broke his maiden, would be forwardly placed in this race. But I do think it's worth noting that 2 of the 3 horses that are shown forward on this pace projector are coming from the Safi Joseph barn. So I think Safi, in a lot of ways, will be in control of how fast they go up front. If only one of the horses sends, the other takes back, maybe this pace moderates a little bit.
Let's meet the field here for a very interesting race of the day on Thursday. The number 1 Tuscan Gold is graded stakes placed. Ran a really nice third in the Louisiana Derby when kind of wide all the way around the track. Came back and was only 9-2 in the Preakness and was kind of a wise guy horse in that race. A lot of people thought he was interesting. It wasn't the strongest Preakness in the world on paper. The lack of early speed, though, hurts a little bit here, even though he has won at Gulfstream Park. And this just kind of feels to me like a really nice starting point. I'm not saying they don't want him to win, but I could see him running well here, and that could set him up for other races. And I think the fact that this race, maybe the pace scenario is a little bit confusing, that might hurt him too. If it was a dead set that we'd have a couple one-dimensional speed horses going, it would really set up well for him. But in here, not quite sure if he gets the race that he needs to run at, David.
Yeah, he's the best horse of the race. I don't think there's really any question about that. It's just a matter of whether or not this is the right spot for him to shine coming off this layoff, given the fact that he really seemed to blossom as the distances got longer last year. You mentioned how well he ran in that Louisiana Derby. That was going the mile and 3/16 distance. It was a real test of stamina for the 3-year-olds at that point in their careers, and he handled it well, and he ran okay in the Preakness. It wasn't the strongest Preakness field, and he never looked like he was really going to be a factor in that race. Kind of stayed on at the end. Again, really hammering home how strong he is in the stamina department. But you mentioned some of the issues, the throat operation, the fact that he's been away for so long and has had trouble getting back to the races. And I was also looking up some stats for trainer Chad Brown coming in here that apply to both of his runners. In Gulfstream Park dirt routes over the past 5 years, Chad is just 6 for 58. And kind of hard to believe when you think about it that Chad Brown has only won 6 dirt rounds at Gulfstream in a 5-year period. But he just doesn't have a whole lot of success at this meet. And it should be noted that coming off layoffs, Chad has amazing stats in general. At all tracks across the country, he does great off layoffs and dirt routes. At Gulfstream, within this sample, he's just 0 for 7 with horses coming off layoffs of 4 months or more, which again applies to both horses in this race. So just another reason to wonder if we're going to see the very best effort from Tuscan Gold off this break.
Tuscan Gold will take a lot of money from the inside. The number 2, the Thor, is Chilean bred. This horse most recently was second. Went back and watched the race, kind of loomed up at the top of the lane and ran by. Was not a bad effort. You know, the finish second, and if you look at the overall form, it's fine. It's just so hard sometimes, David, to understand where these horses will stack up when they come over here from some of these races in South America or other places. So looking at the Thor with the blinkers coming on, Gutierrez jumping aboard today, how do you think he fits in this spot?
Yeah, it's pretty hard to gauge this one's quality. I mean, they're not picking out the most ambitious spot first time in the country, not like they're trying a stakes race, but they are catching some horses with stakes credentials in this allowance event. The one, reference point for the Thor looking through his form is that he was beaten by one of your favorite horses, Gino, in
Yeah.
Mufasa, 4 back. No match for that rival that day, and he hasn't really beaten much, it looks like, in his native Chile. So we'll see what we get from this wild card.
Yeah, hard to get a read on him as we move to the number 3, Heartened. This one's a little bit interesting, making the second start back after about 7 months. Thought he was in a little bit tight, got squeezed back at the start, and then he got stuck in a bad spot, moved down to the inside, and kind of ran like a horse who may have needed the race late, was not quite as fit late in the race. I think that race could give him a little bottom now cutting back to the mile. And the race has come back live so far, David. We know Morgan Point is in good form. Third place finisher Lightning Tones just came back to win the Sunshine Classic, next out with the 91 Buyer speed figure. How does the 3 fit with this group?
Yeah, I agree with everything you said about the trip for Heartened last time. He was just never really in a comfortable position. He was, behind those horses. They kept backing down the pace and just got pushed down to the rail in the stretch. And that was more of an outside flow race. And it just never looked like he was really comfortable that day. My problem with Heartened is I go back to his prior races and I just have trouble finding the effort that really makes me want to bet him here because he's shown potential on a number of occasions. He just doesn't have that speed figure that he's run in the past that makes me think he's quite fast enough to beat some of these others if they show up with their A efforts.
Let's move to the number 4. Who's the King? Irad Ortiz Jr. will be aboard for Safety Joseph Jr. Winner at Gulfstream Park, but that was back against Maiden in the optional 50 claimers. And since then, and since stepping up into winners, it hasn't been very consistent. Most recently was in the Pennsylvania Derby, was a big long shot there. Seems to have some trouble issues and some issues at the start of races. Where do you think Who's the King stacks up with this group? Does he fit well with them?
He's a tough horse to assess in here because, as you mentioned, he is difficult to ride, and that is an understatement. I mean, you watch his last few races, and if the jockey grabs his head at all, I mean, his nose goes straight up in the air. I mean, you see comment lines on horses getting a little rank, and you watch the replay, and it's not so bad. You watch this horse's replays, it's a total disaster. I mean, he just completely loses his mind when the jockey tries to take a hold of him. That was actually a big problem last time at the Pennsylvania Derby. And considering how much he fought Mike Smith in the early stages of that race, he actually ran on okay to only get beaten 11 lengths. I mean, he was in the mix in mid-stretch, and then we just kind of finished at the end of that race. They've taken some time. They're coming back off the layoff here. He's in a position where he can be a little more forwardly placed than he's been in some recent starts. So maybe he has that chance to be free running towards the front end, which is probably going to be a better scenario for him. There's ability in there. He's just a little tough to trust.
The 2 horses that maybe keeping him company up front could be right next door to him in the number 5, God's Timing, first up, who was able to go over to Tampa and beat a softer group last time out, David. The 4th place finisher in that race came back to beat 10,000 claimers next time out. So when you're kind of stacking up races and you have one horse facing 10 claimers and other horses facing graded stakes foes, you kind of get a chance to see where they fit, but should at least get some early pace from this horse and be forwardly placed in here.
Yeah, he could be forwardly placed. We'll see how much pressure he applies if they decide to go with Who's the King up front. Just feels like this horse is stepping way up in class. He beat a much weaker field at Tampa last time, and just seems like he's a little overmatched in this spot.
Number 6, Malarchuk, has shown a lot of ability in his 3 starts, but he's had gaps after each of his races. So it looks like a horse who's needed time in between. Most recently, he raced back in April of 2024, and I believe coming out of that, he had a lung infection. So they had to take some time with him. Dave Grenning has a really nice article about this race, kind of previewing it and giving you some of the details about Malarchuk and Tuscan Gold and what they've gone through getting the comeback. So you can check that out at DRF.com. Here's the race, David, as he's just kind of putting away the field here at Aqueduct back in April.
Yeah, he was impressive this day and finally ran a faster speed figure. That 87 Buyer that he earned back in April of his 3-year-old season would translate well if he could merely repeat it in this spot to be competitive with a group like this. And you would think with routine improvement, if he comes back the same horse, he might be capable of running a Buyer in the 90s. But as you mentioned, he's had all that time away. I mean, it's never a big surprise when you see layoff lines between the starts of Sons of Nyquist. They just seem to be pretty fragile horses, but they are talented. And we saw it from him last time. He's drawn perfectly towards the outside. He could be up close every step of the way. We'll just see if he's ready to deliver that performance off the break. And again, that stat that we applied to Tuscan Gold also fits with this horse.
And rounding out the field is Timeout. Timeout was third in the Curlin in 2024 behind Unmatched Wisdom. And then he was second behind Allowance Foes. And those two races are very good. That race at Saratoga, both of the races were at Saratoga. Following that, though, steps up into the Pennsylvania Derby. I think it shows you, David, how good a form he was in at the time, though, because he was only 10-1 in the Pennsylvania Derby. We were talking about Who's the King, who was 63-1 in that race and just seemed a little bit overmatched. Following the Pennsylvania Derby, Timeout comes back. Kind of a disappointing race when he's just wide around the track, and Aqueduct never really had a shot last time out. Couple months off. What do you think about this one making his first start of the year?
So this horse definitely has run speed figures that might make him the horse to beat in this race. I mean, he was running a Bayer of 95 when he broke his maiden back in the summer of last year, and things have steadily gone in the wrong direction over his last several starts. But I kind of have a theory about Timeout. I don't think he loves running inside of horses. He just got stuck down on the rail in the Pennsylvania Derby. And that was a race that was mostly dominated towards the front end anyway. So Orr's trying to close from the back like he was not going to really fit the race flow. But he was just towards the inside, shuffled a little bit, just never looked totally comfortable down there. And I know the comment line last time says that he was sort of wide and upper stretch. That was another race where he was right down on the rail for almost all of his trip and got shuffled back around the turn a little bit. And when he finally got to the outside in the stretch, he was really running on at the end, but the race was already over at that point. I am a little concerned that the mile is just a tad sharp for him, but I do think he's going to get a way more comfortable trip for him being drawn outside of horses. And if this pace moderates, maybe he's sitting right on top of the leaders, and I know he can finish off going a distance like this.
There's your field for a really interesting race of the day on Thursday at Gulfstream Park. Let's take a look at selections, David. How are you going to end up in this one? Who do you put on top?
Yeah, we'll see if I actually get the 5-1 morning line on Timeout, because to me, he looks a little more logical than that, given the speed figures that he's run. But I just really like the draw for him outside of the other speed. He can sort of get into his own rhythm as this long striding son of Curlin. And I think he just fits this race really well from a class perspective. So I put him on top over the number 4, Who's the King, who I think is dangerous, but is just tough to trust.
I'll go 3, 1, 6, 7. The two horses who I were kind of looking at to maybe bet in this race were the 3 and the 7. The horse who you have on top and who I do from a value-based standpoint. I feel like one of them might offer you some value. I actually wouldn't be shocked if Timeout gets hit a little bit and Heartened actually floats up a tad bit and then maybe becomes a little more playable in that like 6-1-ish range, 5-1 or above. So however you're playing them on Thursday at Gulfstream Park, we wish you the best of luck.